As you can imagine, for somebody whose last name is Smuts, I have to be careful spending too much time talking about other people's last names. I had a colleague in Minnesota, though, whose last name was Preston, and he was of Norwegian descent. It's my understanding that word means pastor in Norwegian. And he spent a year serving a parish in Norway, so he was the Preston, or the pastor, which I thought was kind of cool. Shepherd, it just keeps going. But that image of shepherding is something that is very removed for most of us. There are a few of us, maybe, that have some farm background that is in a first-person reference. But for the most part, that's something that's starting to become more and more distant. This sense of a rural economy that would have involved sheep, that would have involved animals at all steps. I was very privileged in my first call to minister to people who were the children of immigrants to that part of northwestern Minnesota. I remember the good Evald Stark, son of Swedish immigrants who had grown up speaking Swedish at home, who was in a nursing home at the time and had gotten a little dehydrated and a little confused and delirious. And so he had been sent to the hospital. And I remember sitting in the chair next to his bed as he carried on this very energetic conversation with people who were not there, who thankfully spoke English, such that I could catch a little bit of a glimpse to a window of a farming culture of the 1930s in west central Minnesota. It was a discussion that involved how to get the animals and the equipment back into the barn, because the animals were there because they were what pulled the equipment in that day and age. And clearly what I could glean was that there was a sequence in which the animals and the equipment get back into the barn, and somebody clearly had done something backwards. It was this amazing glimpse to a time and a place that I had never experienced and would be difficult to find even in this day. When we think of this agricultural image, we also have to peel back sometimes our romantic sense of it. For those of you who perhaps grew up closer to it, there's maybe no romanticism in it. But when we think of it associated with Jesus, think of the art that we think of. We think of the music, and you notice how clean it often is. Jesus is in white robes, exactly what you would wear for working with animals, right? His hair is blow-dried. It's all very clean. He doesn't even deal with grown-up animals. It's always like lambs, right? And they're perfectly white, and their little hooves are like polished as he's walking around with them. There is no sense that this is dirty work, that there are times when it may be dangerous, that there might be risk to self. There's no sense of that in this romanticized image of this agrarian example. But as we walk through this account, we imagine that. As I was thinking of these different words for pastor, for shepherd, I was also thinking of another thing happening in our lives. We lost our family dog a few months ago. We had to put her to sleep, which was a very sad day for us. She was part German shepherd, Schäferhund. The idea that this dog is trained and bred in a fashion to look after sheep, to kind of round them up. And it's interesting when you look at dogs that there's this sense of what are they supposed to be like, this breed or that. And you get all these breed standards, right? And you immediately start thinking of the Westminster Kennel Club, right? And these fanatics kind of combing their dog's hair and blow drying it and trimming it and bows and all this kind of business. But every once in a while, you see a description for an animal, often a shepherding or hunting dog, where it says, scars and defects to the coat should not be penalized. Scars and defects to the coat should not be penalized because this is a working dog. the sense of one who is at risk in their work. When we think of today as Good Shepherd Sunday, that is the image that we have. One who is scarred, one who has mud up to his knees, one who is constantly doing a work again. I read an article about a family that had gotten a new dog, and it was a shepherding background kind of dog. They had just redone their backyard and had a big party and had a bunch of people over, and people were milling around in the backyard, and they were having drinks, telling stories. And after about a half an hour of everybody being there, they realized that over that time, the dog had been working them into this very tight circle. They all stopped, turned around, and kind of spread out again. And you can think and imagine the dog going, "I just got you there. I got to start over." How often does Christ look at us and say, "I just got you there. I got to start over"? This sense of flock is not something that resonates with us. We don't like to think of ourselves as lamb or sheep. We like to think of ourselves as, rugged people, charting our own course. I can go my own way. I don't need anyone else. And yet that is not at all the way in which we live our lives. We live our lives every minute dependent on those around us, dependent on our immediate family, on our neighbors, for those who care for our community and make sure that the streets are safe. There's all kinds of people that we depend on every minute of every day. And when we gather in this space as a flock, we are mindful that Christ is among us, bringing us together, that in the bread and the wine that we share, that we are made one people in his image. That sounds great. What does that mean? In the reading that we had earlier that Dan shared with us, we get a glimpse of the earliest Christian community. They gathered together for prayer, for food. They shared everything in common and gave to one another as any had need. Now, what do you mean by need? And how are you vetting these people before they come in, right? Are you doing credit checks on these sheep before they come into the flock? What do you mean? Doesn't it mean maybe the Greek doesn't really say need? Maybe it says earned. So everything was shared with everybody around to the extent to which they earned it, right? Actually, unlike the Hebrew, Greek is actually a lot closer, and the text is need. The shepherd gathers us together in a way that makes us uneasy. We are brought together in a way that the shadows and the valleys do not scare us, that brings us together in a hope that allows us to see around the corner, knowing that we are not alone. But we're also always put together with a bunch of our sisters and brothers, and they put up with us just like we put up with them. A sense that the flock is the people of God in all of its beautiful, shiny aspects, in all of its broken and painful aspects. When we think of that work of the shepherd that brings the flock to those places and through them that are dark and shadowed, like we read from the 23rd Psalm, we are also mindful of all of those who have been in our lives that have shepherded us around the next corner. I think on Quilt Sunday, we think of teachers and coaches, mentors, neighbors, family. We think of mothers today, certainly. Those who have reached out and helped us through. And on Good Shepherd Sunday, we are mindful of Christ, the Good Shepherd, who continues to lead us, who continues to call us by name and shepherd us between the shadows and around the corners. So I would be strong in reminding you that Christ is with us, that Christ does not show frustration when we scatter, when he needs to go back to gather us in, who has not blinked because of the scars suffered on our behalf, but rather the one who is loyal and always there in the darkest of times. As you move through your week, consider how you have been shepherded. And consider, too, those around you and perhaps behind you, that you might shepherd them as well. Amen.